Dr. Marc Feldman and J.R. Myers. I'm Jordan Campbell, and this is the Presidential Debate Series. Hello and welcome to the Presidential Debate Series. I'm your host, Jordan Campbell. Today we have two candidates from the Constitution and Libertarian parties. Joining us via Skype is Dr. Marc Feldman of the Libertarian Party. Dr. Feldman graduated from Northwestern University in 1980 with a degree in philosophy before moving on to complete medical training at the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. He earned his master's degree in health finance and management from the Johns Hopkins School of Public Health and practiced anesthesiology there for 11 years. He is a lifetime member of the Delta Omega Public Health Honor Society. And joining us by phone is J.R. Myers. Mr. Myers has served in the Montana Republican, Libertarian, and Reform parties, the last two of which he chaired. He was a member of the Alaskan Independent Party for 7 years, rising to become vice chair. In 2010, he founded the Alaska Constitution Party, which is a formal affiliate of the National Constitution Party. Thank you both for joining us.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Thank you very much, Jordan. I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
All right, let's go ahead to domestic policy. Mr. Myers, you write on your website, quote, "We affirm the God-given legal personhood of all human beings from fertilization to natural death without exception," end quote. Does this include situations in which a woman's life is endangered by a pregnancy?
Yes, it would include all situations, right? Life is life.
Great. Okay. And Dr. Feldman, what is your response to this, and what is your belief on this issue?
Well, it comes from my own religious background, which is that a fetus is definitely human life, but it's a human life which is an integral part of the life of the mother, that it's not appropriate to try to separate the fetus, the life of the fetus, from the life of the mother. A pregnant woman is one person and not two. And that's my personal belief, and not necessarily something which I think needs to be established by the state.
Great, thank you. I'd like to remind our audience that you can submit your questions to our guests through our website, www.publicsquare.net, and we'll answer as many as we can live on the air toward the end of the show. Mr. Myers, you write also on your website that marriage is between one man and one woman, and that is the foundation of the family, and it is fundamental in maintaining a stable, healthy, and prosperous social order. With the Supreme Court ruling on this issue, and now showing that a majority of Americans are in favor of same-sex marriage, would you support a constitutional amendment banning same-sex marriage?
Well, this is just in accord with our Judeo-Christian heritage, so that the Supreme Court really doesn't necessarily have jurisdiction in this area as far as I'm concerned, and I think the Constitution Party in general. It's probably best that the state's not involved in marriage at all, since the unintended consequences are now being manifest with the same-sex marriage debate. So whereas marriage began as an institution, a religious institution, and is more like a contractual obligation than the state having a vested interest in it.
And Dr. Feldman, do you agree with Mr. Myers' stance on this?
I'd say for the most part, I mean, we have a separation of church and state. I think we should have a separation of marriage and state, a separation of gun ownership and state. I think that we need to go back to what the purpose of our government is, which is primarily to protect our borders and to protect the rights of the citizens. These other issues are divisive, but there's room for each citizen to decide what they feel is right for themselves and their family. I'll take exception to the idea that most Americans favor gay marriage. I don't think that most Americans would encourage it. However, I think that most Americans feel that it's wrong to prohibit it. And that's how I feel about many of these issues, that these issues are too important for government. They really need to be decided by the free will of the citizen.
Mr. Myers, you support the, quote, regulation of the numbers and qualifications of immigrants into the country. What exactly would you do about the millions of immigrants that are already living on U.S. soil?
Well, I think we need to know who's living amongst us and what their business is here. So it is one of the few legitimate functions of government to protect our borders. So, we should not be having porous borders with millions of people crossing over that we don't know where they're coming from, what their intention is here, especially when we have those who are vowing our destruction, who are being found in increasing numbers inside of our borders. So we need to protect the citizens, and that begins with border controls. So I think we need to start looking at who's here, and we need to start deporting people.
So in a Myers administration, what would that deportation plan look like?
Well, first of all, we need to stop more people from coming over, and then we need to look at who's here and why they're here. I do believe some people are here for legitimate reasons of asylum, but most of them are here for economic purposes, so they need to start being returned back to their countries if they can't prove a legitimate reason for asylum.
And Dr. Feldman, what would you say to this plan? Do you have a different view on this issue, or how would you handle undocumented immigrants?
My point of view is very different. My feeling is that we are a nation of immigrants, and that anyone who loves this country, wants to be here, wants to work to protect it and build this country, belongs here. And the idea that immigrants are a threat to this country just doesn't pan out, just not true. Immigrants, whether documented or undocumented, commit less crime, use less services, and they actually add to our country. They don't subtract. You have someone like Donald Trump, these billionaires, if they wanted to build a wall, they could have done it a decade ago. It wasn't done because they don't want it. They want to talk about it to get votes. But the fact is, undocumented immigrants, they're floating Social Security. They use to determine who should come in. My plan would be to use our sponsorship system. We already have systems in place to sponsor spouses and children from other countries. I would drop the requirements for the family relationship and make it being a citizen, one of the rights of the citizens should be to sponsor as few or as many refugees as they would like to take responsibility for. And leave it up to the citizens. Should we take 1,000? Should we take 1,000,000? It's a question of how many of the American people are willing to sponsor.
Mr. Myers, Dr. Feldman has said that in his administration it would be left up to the citizens how many immigrants would be in a certain state, and what would be your rebuttal to that?
Well, since they've already shown a disregard for our laws by being here illegally, I can't imagine, trying to legalize them in that way by just allowing everyone to decide their own immigration numbers. I think, we have a serious problem. We have areas of the country that are no longer recognizable as parts of America, and it's not just our southern border, but we have a porous northern border as well, and I'm so concerned about the border with Russia and what's going on in the Arctic as far as our domestic security up there. A lot of people don't know that border is being, that the Russians have started to refurbish military bases in the Arctic, and that this summer they were conducting joint military exercises with the Chinese in the Bering Sea, sailing through the Aleutian Islands. So we have serious border problems all the way around, and allowing the citizens to make that decision as to who is living amongst us is really not a workable or feasible solution. Again, if they've already demonstrated their disregard for our laws by coming here illegally, why would we expect that they would convert to legal, upstanding citizens at some point in the future?
Great. Thank you so much, Mr. Myers. We're going to move on to foreign policy. So, Dr. Feldman, Mr. Myers opposes unilateral disarmament and dismemberment of American defense infrastructure. Would you reduce the size of the military, and if so, by how much?
Well, again, my plan is to move the focus of power from a centralized government to having more power in the hands of the citizens. Our military certainly needs to be reduced, and its effectiveness needs to be increased. The beginning is to look strategically at what are the goals of our military. Is our mission to be the policeman for the world, or is it to protect the borders of our nation? Certainly, we need to protect ourselves from foreign attack and have the capability to have an awesome and debilitating response to any aggression over our borders. However, we can't use our military to try to build nations on the other side of the world. We're not an imperial colonizing organization. Those don't work anymore. Other countries need to go through their own evolutionary processes, and with military adventures, the world is nothing more than a huge subsidy to the American military-industrial complex, and it doesn't make us any safer.
Okay, and so, Mr. Myers, what would you respond to that?
Well, I would agree that there are many many places where our troops should not be, and I'm concerned about the extra constitutional deployment of our troops. So while I believe that we need to maintain a strong defense, I don't believe in military adventurism, especially extra constitutional, in other words, that which is not authorized by an act of war by the Congress. So I think that we see a lot of usurpations of authority through the executive branch, particularly in regards to the military. So we need to make sure that our military is engaged in defensive maneuvers, not in offensive maneuvers. And we need to make sure that any time that our military is deployed outside of our borders, that it is constitutionally authorized. So, but we do have serious problems. Again, our border with Russia is, whereas Russia should have been a natural ally, they're becoming increasingly aggressive because our foreign policy has failed, and we have withdrawn basically our interests from the Arctic region, and Russia has come to fill the vacuum. So we do have strategic and border interests that are not being properly addressed, and I think part of that's because we're engaged in places we don't need to be. So we need to defend ourselves where it makes sense, and we need to not be engaged in the internal affairs of other countries.
Great. Thank you so much, Mr. Myers. Dr. Feldman, there's been a lot of controversy within the Libertarian Party about the so-called non-aggression principle. And so what does this principle mean to you personally, and do you support it?
I support the non-aggression principle 100% as an ethical and moral imperative. To me, it's a corollary of the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. I wouldn't want them to be using force against me or to interfere with my free decisions. So I wouldn't want to apply force and interfere with the decisions of others. The idea is that everyone should be able to choose how to live their lives as long as they're not infringing on the rights of others. The problem I have is that I don't feel that that's a total political plan. In addition to the non-aggression principle, I have what I call a positive empowerment principle. And that means that as an organization and as individuals, we should work to maximize the the power of all individuals to control themselves, their property, and their environment, as long as they're not infringing on the rights of others. Liberty is more than just freedom. It's more than just not having someone who oppresses you. You also need to have options in order to make decisions. So you need to have freedom and power. I give the example that if someone's stuck at the bottom of a deep hole and they can't get out, well, there may not be anybody oppressing them, but they're not going to have liberty until they get a ladder to get out of the hole. This isn't to say that the government should force people to help other people, but they shouldn't allow people to block access either. That we need to change the infrastructure of our country to allow individuals more easily to help one another and to build up our private social safety nets so that we can decrease the amount of force and intrusion of our government on our lives.
Great. Mr. Myers, do you agree or disagree?
Well, I would generally agree that if we return to a constitutional framework, we would see less government intrusion into our lives. And, government should not be initiating force. The purpose of government is to safeguard our liberties and our properties and should allow for the creation of an environment that's conducive to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I do believe in the golden rule, and whereby we should do unto others as we would have done unto us. So, but yes, there's more than just a neutral stance. You have to show there needs to be a positive or altruistic or whatever you want to call it effort, freedom of association through churches or nonprofit corporations, extending hands to those who aren't able to help themselves, because we always will have the poor and the disabled among us. So we can't just sit back and allow them to fend for themselves either.
We are now going to move on to legal and constitutional issues. So, Mr. Myers, Dr. Feldman writes that he will, quote, declare a national fiscal emergency and by executive order direct every government agency to apply strict controls to limit spending to available revenue, end quote. You oppose the use of executive orders because they bypass Congress, but would you support this one because you agree with its intent, or would you oppose it based on principle?
I think I would have to oppose it based on principle because, again, it's the usurpation of congressional authority. The Congress needs to be responsible for the revenue side and the budget, and the administration can certainly propose a lower budget, but to continue to use executive orders to shape policy is a mistake, and it is, again, an extra constitutional measure. In my estimation, we need to eliminate the unconstitutional executive orders, not increase them.
Okay, Dr. Feldman, your response to what Mr. Myers just said.
Well, I think that as the chief executive, certain powers according to the Constitution, and as president, one is not required to follow the edicts of Congress as opposed to what the Constitution requires. The president is required to follow what is required by the Constitution. And the highest duty of the president is to protect our nation and to keep our government running. And we cannot keep our government running and have threatens with numerous shutdowns as we go bigger, more and more into debt. So in my administration, not a single dollar will be added to the debt. I don't want to do it by executive order. I will give a balanced budget to Congress on my very first day. They can pass it. They could pass another balanced budget, and I will sign it. But if they wanted to talk about it while they're spending and appropriating more and more money that we don't have, as president, I will not spend it. Across the board, every agency will do what it needs to do to protect the rights of our citizens and defend our country. We will not continue borrowing more and more money. We're not at war. We don't have any great national disasters. There is no reason why our government should be spending more money than it brings in revenue.
All right, so let's take some questions from our viewers. So Lauren Oliver asks, do you think the Islamic State is a direct threat to the U.S.? And if so, how would you address it? Dr. Feldman.
Very good. I refer to the organization as the al-Baghdadi cult. They're a group of people who have decided that this terrorist by the name of al-Baghdadi is the caliph and the leader of the world's billion Muslims. Very, very few of the Muslims community accept it. Many are adamantly against it. Al-Baghdadi is in the same group as Charles Manson or Jim Jones. This is not a state, and it's not Islamic. They would like to be seen as the Islamic State, but they're not. They're a cult, and they're a criminal cult. They are murderous, and they don't represent any religion, especially Islam. And we should be treating them as the criminals that they are. This is not a religious war, although they would like it to be. What this is crime. It's international crime, and we should be treating it as through our international crime-fighting organizations. I would think that the leadership should be taken by those Islamic countries who are neighbors with this base of the cult, and we should offer assistance as part of an international coalition. But this is not our fight alone. This is something that we need to join in with the international organizations to fight these criminals and to eliminate this threat that's not just to our nation, to all nations.
Mr. Myers, what is your plan to address the Islamic State, and do you think it is a direct threat to the United States?
Well, I think it is a direct threat. They've made direct threats to us, and so they've also caught several potential perpetrators here traveling over, trying to infiltrate our country. I also think it's incumbent upon our government not to be involved in funding or providing any kind of weapons to any of these groups. And so there are questions as to how the group got started to begin with. So if we were to remove our military interests from such places as Syria, that would be a start. But we do need to make sure our borders are secure, and so we probably need to be preventing any further influx of people from these areas into our country at this time. The people that need the most protection right now are the Christians who are being severely persecuted in those areas, and if anyone's allowed in, it should, for asylum, it should be the Christians who are being persecuted. But we need to withdraw our military from those areas, and we need to secure our borders. That's the answer.
And now it's time for Answer This, where each guest asks a question directly to the other. So who would like to go first?
I've got one.
Okay, Dr. Feldman, question for Mr. Myers.
Mr. Myers, we're both 100% behind the Constitution of the United States, but we can't change anything until we win. I'd like to hear your plan for actually winning this election.
Well, it's difficult when the playing field's not level. So I would like to see the removal of the Citizens United ruling, which elevates corporations to human status and allows all of these millions and billions of dollars to be poured into the system. So, and other than that, I mean, that's the biggest obstacle is all this free money. It's not free money, but money that's being poured into the system that's entangling all the politicians. We need to return our government at all levels to citizen legislators, citizens who are involved in local government, state government, and federal government. So we need to awaken the people and get them, they need to be educated in the system, in the Constitution. And so I think my campaign is about educating the people about the Constitution and their need to be involved and how detrimental apathy is.
And okay, and so Mr. Myers, what would be your question for Dr. Feldman?
Okay, so the Libertarian Party advocates that people do as they will. So how do you balance the moral compass or God with the with that concept of letting people do
Yes.
what they will.
I think that the fact is people should not be looking to a political organization like a government state for their moral and ethical values or their moral inspiration. Morality comes from our parents, from our religious organizations, from our own consciences. And this is where we should be supporting that each of the American citizens should be looking towards their own moral compass and not to get things done under threat of force by a government that runs on politics and money.
Wonderful. All right, and it's now time for We Agree, where each guest names something the other said that he agrees with. So, Dr. Feldman, we'll start with you.
Well, I think that one thing that we agree on is that our government has its legitimacy from the consent of the people of the United States, and that's been established through our Constitution, and that the only individual citizens have rights. Organizations don't, states don't, the government does it. They have powers. And I agree with JR that we need to bring government back under the limitations of the Constitution of the United States.
Wonderful. And Mr. Myers, one thing that you agreed with Dr. Feldman on.
Yes, I would have to echo those sentiments that the aggrandizement of power, whether it's through government or corporate interest, is detrimental to the common person. So we need to return to that constitutional framework, devolve government back to the states, to the localities, and to the individual citizens themselves, and to make sure that people have a clear understanding of their role in that government, because it takes the involvement of everyone to have a truly effective government. So I would just encourage people to get involved, and I think that's the key. And that's what I would agree with.
Okay. Well, that's all the time we have. We'd like to thank Dr. Marc Feldman of the Libertarian Party and J.R. Myers of the Constitution Party for joining us on the show. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching the Presidential Debate Series. I'm Jordan Campbell. We'll see you next time.